All right, everyone. So we've been talking about, strategies for responsive design. That includes, working with responsive units, responsive media, meaning like images, video, responsive grids, which we already kind of knew how to do, and media queries. Okay, that's probably that's kind of the only new thing I'm teaching you guys in this particular module that we've never really, talked about before. So we talked about media queries to help change the layout of something over depending on the size of the browser. All right, so let's do another couple examples. So this is exercise 7. So it has a bunch of cities here. So when it's a large size, meaning above 955 in this case, I'm counting as like desktop computers, or it could be something like what's the word I'm looking for? Like a TV, TVs have browsers in them and things like that. For medium-sized devices, which would be like a tablet, I'm counting a medium-sized device as anything that's about 480 to about above 480 to about below 955. Now you might be wondering, where am I getting these numbers from? This is kind of a thing where it's like it's always changing. Okay. Obviously I'm basing them off the average size of devices, but the average changes. I showed you guys earlier that, 17 years ago, the size of the, monitors have changed. So what you need to kind of do is do a little bit of research. Here's this website that I like. It's called Stat Counters. Okay. And like what it sounds like, it gives you statistics. So I'm going to look at mobile. Okay. Now this is mobile based on like the company, so like this blue line represents Samsung, I believe, and this represents probably Apple, probably actually not that high, but LG, right? Let's actually change this. So I want to search by, so this is market share, like which browser is the most popular. This is the most popular operating system for mobile phones. I want to look at screen resolutions. Okay. And so this is kind of showing the various sizes. And you can see that for a lot of the widths, I mean, obviously some of them are very large, but those are pretty rare. It's actually not that rare. So it is kind of changing, but it's like, a lot of them have a width of, somewhere between 400 and, like this is 300. What is this one? So I don't know. I mean, it may become a time where the width is changing. It's always evolving. Every year, things change when it comes to technology. So, this is as of last year. So I don't know. Actually, to be honest, maybe I might need to revise where my cutoff points are, because it seems like a lot of devices for mobile are actually getting wider than 480. But I'll need to do a little more research. Maybe I want to see what's, for tablets. And let's look at the same thing, screen resolutions. Yeah, it seems like a lot of them are, wait, this is for tablets? Seems like it's the same. All right. So yeah, so for tablets, it's somewhere between, these are the widths. You can see some of them are above 955, but a lot of them are sort of between 700 to 800, it seems like, so I mean, this does exist, and that's the market value. You can look at sort of the percentages of things, but that seems like it's an outlier. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's representative of Oh, I think I had all platforms. Let's make sure I go to, yeah, okay. So this, I was looking at both tablets and I was wondering why I feel like the tablet was so, I was like, man, what phone has a width of 1200? But this is purely just for smartphone. And you can see it's somewhere between like 360. The highest one is like, 430, which is fine. But that's just, so, maybe 430 to 955, or, you could figure out the exact numbers you want to do, but it's like, those are the breakpoints that I want. Okay. And then eventually it goes down to being a one column layout. So in the cars, we had two breakpoints. We had above 600 and below 600. In this one, we're going to have three breakpoints, which is above 955, below 480, and then between 480 to 955. Okay. So this particular, we're not going to worry about responsive units, at least in terms of type. There's no images in this particular one. So you can take a look at it, and this is how it looks. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go, make sure that this viewport has been set up in your head section somewhere, which it has. This allows my device to work within responsiveness. And what I'm going to do is let's take this div. To be honest, I'm going to add a little container on it, just in case. It's always good when you're doing layout to be more specific about what you're doing. Let's take that and display grid. And I'm going to set this up just for now to, I think it was 4 columns. So grid template columns. Let's do repeat for 1 fraction. Okay, that's divided up into 4 even columns. Okay, there you go. So this is just kind of the default, right? Now, as a design, this looks pretty good. This would look good for like a newspaper or something. But as this page gets smaller, like we're kind of running into that same problem. Like this design just isn't working. All right, 4 columns is too much. Maybe this would be better with like 2 columns or 3 columns. So I'm going to say, okay, let's set it up that when it gets to below 955, we want to go from 4 columns to 2 columns. So once again, the way I'm going to do that is use an @media query. So @media screen, which means if this particular web page is being previewed in a browser, which to be honest is going to be like 99% of the time, and max width 955, meaning it cannot be bigger than 955. Okay. So anything that happens between here, this is what's going to change. We're basically substituting new CSS. And I'm going to say, well, normally the container is 4 columns, but let's make this container, in this case, 2 columns. Oops, I don't want that. Grid template columns, and let's just make it 2 columns. Okay, 2 fractions. All right, so I'm going to test this. Let's go into inspect. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see it a little better. So this is above 955, we're at like 2000. I make this smaller, and then eventually, boom. Okay, once it gets past, it switches from 4 columns to 2 columns. Okay, and why did we do this? Well, it just looks better. Like, like you can't take something that's meant for a large screen and just squeeze it into a small screen. That's not the way it works. You got to think about like resetting the layout and say, okay, well, we need to make this layout work for this smaller device or a thinner device. It may not even necessarily be smaller, but it may be a different aspect ratio, because normally most, desktops or laptops are longer than they are tall, but most interactive devices like tablets and smartphones are usually taller than they are wide. So you have to change the layout. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. You wouldn't put something that's meant for a wallet size photo into a bigger, canvas. It just doesn't work. So, this works a lot better. I think people would prefer this if they're in like a tablet mode than something like this, if it was squeezed in there. Okay. Now, eventually what's going to happen, is once again, we're going to get to like this kind of situation. Now, if you look at the number, this is somewhere where this would be sort of in the smartphone region. So it's like, okay, at this point, 2 columns, this isn't working. So let's make this into 1 column. So what I'm going to do is say at media screen and max width 480 pixels. And what we're going to do is reset the container, and let's make it 1 column instead of 2 columns or 4 columns. I mean, I can just do this really. I mean, you could do the whole repeat if you want, but it's not repeating really. But if you just want to do it because you like consistency. All right, so let's try this again. Oops, I don't think I saved. And oops, did I not save? Oh, I misspelled screen. There we go. Okay. So 4 columns, 2 columns, and then 1 column. Okay. So like I said, you can see this in most websites where it's like, here's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, right? And then when I make this smaller, now it becomes 2 columns. I'm putting this website into, let's make it even really small. So this is like below 480. And yeah, now it's like 1 column. You can actually see all the breakpoints here. Okay. One thing about doing this is you have to be careful about where you position this. So right now, this is like, what I'm also going to do is let's put some little notes to ourselves. I'm actually going to say, this is a note. I'm going to say this is for medium devices. And I'm going to say this is for, small devices, aka smartphones. I don't say specifically, like, I'm not gonna, I do recommend you don't necessarily like try to make it for whatever the new iPhone is or whatever, because the thing about it is those dimensions always change. Next year, Apple's going to release a new device and it may have a different dimension. So rather than chasing the certain devices, just have a certain range, that way it works for other devices. Also, it's like, notice I'm saying small devices and not necessarily smartphones, because there might be other devices that have small screens that aren't smartphones, like an iWatch or some other device, So this will work not just for, smartphones, but for any device where the screen is smaller than 480 pixels. Okay. Now, the thing about it is part of this is, the part of the way I've written is, we want to make sure that this works above 480. So in other words, if I had rewritten this like this would actually cause a problem. Okay. And let me just put it into. So see how like this always stays 2 columns, even when it's really small. Now, why did that happen? Well, if you look at it, all this is saying is it has to be below 955, right? Well, if it's at 480, even at 300, that's below 955. So anything below 955 is working. But we don't want it to stay too, and what we want is we want this medium to be a range. We want it, yes, we don't want it bigger than 955, but we also need it to be at least 480. So what we might do here is I'm going to say at media screen, we're going to add another parameter to this, and we're going to say min width 480 pixels and max width 955. So essentially we're setting a range. We're saying, yes, it has to be a minimum of this, and it cannot be bigger than that. And that should fix that problem. So even if it's in a different order, it should still work. If you're really cautious, you may want to set up for your large devices too. So I'm going to say at media screen and min width 955. And let's do container. Grid template columns. Oh, sorry. For 1FR. I'm gonna get rid of this. This one is actually, so what this is applying to everything. Like it doesn't matter what size your page is because this is not an immediate query. So anything that's not an immediate query will apply to everything. And then these will only apply depending on the size of the page. All right, so I'm gonna save. And so now I've kind of just double checked that you can see here, there's the, above 955, 480 to 955, and then, 480 below. Okay. Let's do one more example of this. Basically, it's kind of, it's the same thing. It's just kind of combining everything we've talked about. So it's like, I have a large device and it's 1, 2, 3, 3-column layout. The images need to be responsive. And then eventually it goes into a 2-column layout, and then eventually it becomes a 1-column layout. All right, so what I'm going to do is set this up. Now I've actually already set this up with its own document here. So I'm going to throw that bad boy there. And actually, let's just see everything before I, so I'm going to preview this. Right. Each of these is in a container section tag. So I'm going to say container display grid template columns. I'm going to set this up as a 3-column layout. So repeat 3, 1 fraction. All right. I also could have done 33, 33, 33. That's fine too. And all right. There's my columns. Now, eventually what's going to happen is these are going to lock because these images cannot get smaller. If I had set them up, if I had, instead of doing fractions, had I done it like this, you still would have had a problem. What would have happened is the images would have sort of begun overlapping on top of each other, which is not what we want. So the way we're going to fix that is making our images responsive. What I like to do is I just do something like this. So what this means is this is applying to all images, all video tags. You can put the audio tag in there too if you want. And iframes. Iframes are typically what YouTube uses. That's why I'm using iframe. And I'm just going to use that max width 100% thing. Okay. So that way that causes the images to scale when necessary. All right. So I got my responsive media. Now what I'm going to do is let's set up media queries. So I'm going to set this up. This is going to be for large devices. Once again, I'm just going to use sort of 955 as kind of the breakpoint. And I'm going to say at media screen and max width 955. So when it's above 955, I want to keep it as 3 columns. Okay. So I'm actually going to get rid of this from from the thing that applies to everything. Let's just make sure that works. So, oops. Did I save? Grid template, but maybe I'm not above 955. Virtualizes end screen max with 955. Oh, max width. Oops. Needs to be min width. There we go. So anything above 955 should work. And then when it starts to get below 955, it's actually going to break and go back to normal because this only applies in that scenario. So there's no actual layout. Let's set up a 2-column layout. Okay. Now, when it comes to media queries, there's no hard and fast rule about what you change. You just basically have to look at your design and go like, what is working and what's not working? If it's not working, find a way using CSS, if you can, to change that. Now, in this case, the thing that we're really affecting is the layout, which is how many columns we have. But it could also be something like, changing the color of something or, applying, making something fixed versus or not fixed. Maybe maybe you have a fixed item in a desktop view, but it doesn't really work in the mobile. So you remove the fixed in the mobile version or something like that. So I'm going to set this to be between I'm going to set this to be between 480 to 955. So I'm going to say min width 480 pixels and max width 955. Thing I want to change is the number of columns. So let's change that. Grid template columns. Make that 2 columns. Boom, boom. So this is above 955, and then oops, did I not save? What did I do wrong? Oh, I see. Don't worry about what this. I realize what happened here. Somehow this didn't get the. There you go. Okay. That's what happens actually when you don't have the meta. It won't actually respond well, which is what was happening there. Now it gets to here, and actually this is already breaking into a 1-column layout, which is kind of what I wanted, but just to be sure, let's just add a media query. It's better safe than sorry, as I like to think of it. So let's put that bad boy back there. That media screen and max width 955. And let's just set it to 1 frame. All right. So 3-column layout above 955, 2-column. Oops. Oh, oops. That should be 480. Broke my numbers there. And then when it gets here, boom. Okay. And actually, in this kind of layout, I might go, you know what? Once again, it kind of maybe the titles in the center might look better. You know what I mean? So, if we look at it, those are really just H2. So maybe for the smaller ones, maybe I'm going to set the headings to be, in the center. where it didn't really work for like the, it didn't look really good here. I don't know if I would want it here, but for the smaller devices, it might look better. So, all right, so try that out. It's just once again practice of the of applying media queries and the various responsive techniques of talking.